This is On The Overrun, a podcast about cars and the people around them. Join us for a new episode. We are sitting in quite a luxurious and luckily cool office. It is about 36 to 38 degrees outside in the heart of Stellenbosch. But I get to enjoy some conversation about cars and with a glass of wine, which I'm quite happy about. But welcome back to On The Overrun. And today we have Andre Bezuidenhout. Before we go into much of what he's done, what he's seen, what he's raced, I'll definitely pour a glass of his wine. If you ever had Bertha wines or have seen Bertha wines, please give it a try. It is definitely delightful. But before we've gone into much into what he's seen, what he's driven, what he's experienced, if you look back at high school Andre, start of university Andre, have you ever imagined that you would take a Porsche around the world and seen what you've seen and driven where you've driven? Is that something that you even had a thought of at that point of your life?
Well, let me answer you like this, Martin. Life without a dream, as Madiba said, is not reality. It's when you put reality to a vision and when a dream comes true that you really experience life. So did I believe that all these wonderful things would happen with me in life when I was a young boy or at school? The answer is simply no. Everybody has got a dream, but you need to make it a reality. So that's my experience in life. Everything that you dream about hard enough that you really want to have in a weird way, life gives you a chance to achieve that.
I also assume that there's more to the dream yet to be experienced and lived out.
Yeah,
it's definitely not reached this end.
Undoubtedly. But before we get into cars, can I welcome you to Weltevreden?
Yeah.
There's a wonderful glass of Sauvignon Blanc.
Thank you so much.
We started embarking on our wine experience shortly before COVID, and we now have 4 wonderful wines in the name of my late mother. Her name is Bertha, and my little girl Marnella, her second name is also Bertha, so Marnella Bertha Bezuidenhout, and she believes that the wine has actually been called after her.
Yeah.
So cheers, welcome,
Cheers.
And thank you very much for having me here.
No, thank you for your time. So when it comes to wine and cars, they don't often fit well together when mixed together, but it's obviously both represent something to be enjoyed with people. Maybe tell us about the passion that you've grown regarding that.
Yeah, look, Weltevreden, it's one of the old estates in Stellenbosch that comes from that high neoclassical Cape Dutch era of 1806 to 1812, and the family was luckily enough to acquire this roundish 2010. So we've been here for about 14 years. It was a very small little estate, and a very good friend of mine, Andre Gunn, a legend of the Porsche Club himself.
Yes.
I got involved in motorsport as a result of a comedy of people that gave young people an opportunity. So I became a member of the Porsche Club, not owning a Porsche, but dreaming that one day I would have a Porsche. So I was driving to court every day of my life with a Superboss Cadet, Opel Cadet. And Andrew Gunn at the time, he was a visionary. So Andrew, because the Porsche Club at the time was going through a very lean time, which was the early 1990s, he created a category for Porsche lovers that didn't own a Porsche. So I drove a Opel Cadet. Toby Fenter, who's walked his own path in life, was the owner of a Opel dealership in Western area. So I bought an Opel Cadet from Toby. I went to court in Western area quite frequently. And Andrew Gunn then created the so-called Class 9. And it was a series of people that loved Porsche, but they couldn't afford a Porsche. And we were treated equally. People embraced us. We were driving Opel Cadets, but we were talking or thinking Porsche.
Yes,
you know,
as you do.
which is the reality about you don't achieve a dream in one day. But if you dream hard enough about it, as we said in the beginning of the discussion, these things happen. So Andrew had an influence on my life there, getting me into, if I say real motorsport, and we'll talk later as to where the passion started. But in I think it was 2018 or so, a neighbor of ours offered a farm next door, which had vineyards on, next to Weltevreden, to us. By that point in time, Weltevreden was it was nothing more than a small little estate with a beautiful old home on, built by Petrolicious in 1812. The weird thing is, and I always joke about this, if you stand in front of Weltevreden, there's a very peculiar thing on the gables. There are two wagon wheels. Now, the legend has it that the Groot Track in South Africa was planned from this house. And Pieter Tief built the house for his sister, and the wagon wheels allegedly went on to show the intention that they intended to move from Colonial Cape. Now, as you know, the Groot Track only happened in 1837 from Graaf Reinet, but by 1812 it was alive in their minds. So when people look at Weltevreden, and there's been so many people here over the years, international visitors, people with great love for motor cars, which we're talking about today, David Piper, Mike Knight, Peter de Tooy, all the, shall I say, the classic racing lovers of South Africa, and some of them of the world, has visited Weltevreden. And whenever I tell this tale, and they say don't stuff up a good story with the facts, but there's one fact that is real. When you look at Weltevreden from the outside, it's got wagon wheels on. So I say Pieter Tief was the first petrolhead at Weltevreden.
It must have been.
And I'm just following suit. But you ask a question about Bertha, how did we get into that? So in 2018, Andrew Gunn, Andrew is a serious winemaker. He's got the wine label called Iona. So Andrew created Iona, and I phoned Andrew and I said, Andrew, my neighbor has offered that we can buy the property next door with vineyards on. And he said we can even put peaches on. So Andrew phoned, he said, absolutely don't do it. 2 days later, Andrew phoned me. He said, did you phone the guy? I said, no. He said, you absolutely have to buy it. I said, Andrew, come on.
Yeah.
What happened in 2 days? He said he drove past and he saw this magnificent south-facing hill. He said, and I've got an idea, you can create a world-class wine, because it looks to me like that angle is about 32 degrees or thereabout. Cut a long story short, on Andrew's advice, we've engaged with Benny Boysen and Jaco Engelbrecht. Jaco is a magnificent viticulturist. And it's now, 6-7 years later. We've had our, I think, 4th year or 5th year of bottling Bertha. And it's turned out to be a magnificent journey. So does wine and cars fit together? Corlandi asked me earlier today, we were looking at something, and she said, why do certain type of people love art? And I thought a little bit about it. There's a weird thing that people that love mobility, which is cars, I find few people that just love cars because it's called cars. They love something more about cars. They love the ability that it gives you to move. So I love mobility. So things that involves passion and perfection have always tickled my, if I call it, fancy.
Yes.
And Andrew, we knew nothing about wine. Absolutely, we were, as I say, a rock spider.
Yes.
And we still know very little. We've studied every book that we can. But if you try hard enough and you commit yourself and you commit the resources, at the end of the day, you can achieve far more than what you could dream of. So Andrew was very instrumental in my life on 2 occasions. One, he brought me into the Porsche Club, driving a Superboss Cadet, and he fostered the aspiration to actually own a proper Porsche later. And that Porsche, my first Porsche, was a 944 Turbo Cup car that I bought from Toby Fenter. And it went away in my life. And about 2-3 years ago, I got that car back again. A guy from Cape Town phoned me and said, I think I've got your car. And I went to go and look at the car, and there was a little mark on the inside of the door. I think there were about 30 of those cars that came to South Africa, but there's no doubt it was the same car, and I bought it back, and my son Andre actually now, he now owns the car, and he went with it to Simola. So Andrew had an influence in the beginning of my life with Porsches, got me into the Porsche Club, and he's also been instrumental in this phase of my life, exciting us about winemaking. So I'm not personally involved in this. My children are now grown up. Imke and Andre lives here, and they look after it. There's a similarity between cars and winemaking. It's a passion and it's an art. You can't do it robustly. And for us, we're just very, very privileged in Stellenbosch, to be able to do this, although we are total rank amateurs at it, if you look at the legends of this industry. But we're learning quickly, and they've embraced us very well.
It's interesting piecing all the puzzle pieces together, just from the brief experience and knowledge I have of you, where you're an advocate, you're into wine, you're into your cars, you're into art. And even though you're not qualified in all of these areas, even though you didn't have the means to be able to purchase a Porsche at that point of your life to be part of the Porsche Club, ultimately a vision brought the reality together, which is very cool to see. And I think definitely many other people's stories will follow suit, where there was a vision and ultimately it came into reality. But somewhere that vision was started with a spark or a passion or something that gripped you initially. So going back into the early years of your life, into young Andre, Andre didn't know much, but just had a lot of energy and passion. Why cars? Why cars? Why did it grip you? What was it about it? Who was it?
Yeah. As one grow older, you have a little bit more time to reflect. And I'm 62 years old now, so the time has gone past so quickly. And if I think back, where did it start with cars? I think I have always been, from the first day I could remember, I can remember the day hero. And in 1969, my late father took my brother and I to Kayalami. And we arrived I'll never forget it, we arrived on a Friday evening. We lived in Witbank. And we drove to Kayalami, and we were going to attend the 9 hour of Kayalami. And on this Friday evening, we arrived at, this, almost want to say desolate racetrack, but with 50 or 70,000 people camping next to the track. And it was quiet when we arrived there. And this young boy, which I was 8 years old at the time, I stood next to the fence, and I remember it vividly. The next moment, it sounded to me like, and the only thing which at the time in my mind, it sounded to me like war, because I've heard about war at that point in time before. And the next moment, down the straight came a 917 of David Piper. To a little boy coming from Witbank at that point in time, I mean, it was something that I've never heard. I've never heard a sound like that. It echoed in my ears, probably plugged my ears. Mm-hmm. But what it did that weekend is it excited something in me about these guys are warriors. They were wrestling with machinery. And then they did it for 9 hours, and David Piper won that event. His team was Team Perfect Circle, which I presume we'll later talk about, and how that, influenced my life later. So, short answer, 1969, next to a racetrack, 8 years old, an impression that was lasting in my life. And, you know, I grew up extremely poorly. We had very, very little. We had a very, very tough life. And I was lucky enough to go and study at the Potchefstroom University with a bursary from the Department of Justice. And I remember, after that first time that we went to Kayalami, I think we went back 2 times thereafter. We went to go and watch a Grand Prix, and we went to watch one other race. But those 3 incidences just inspired me to say that, you know, one day I want to be a racing driver. And it's like Marnella, my little girl. You know, if when I ask Marnella, what does she want to do? No, sy wil 'n brandweerman word, you know. So a firefighter. It's something that impressed me. The love of cars started there. My brother was also keenly into it, so he kept it alive. You know, in my younger years, he was building little model cars, so he kept it alive. And when I completed my studies, and I then became a prosecutor, I became a magistrate, and then I went to the Johannesburg bar. So the development from that was in those early years, 1989, 1990. I went to the Western Area Magistrates Court, and that's where Toby Venter had his Opel dealership, and my then good friends Willie Venter and Rufus van Aarboe, they were keenly involved in the motoring fraternity. You know, Willie was a BMW man. He drove the 325 ISs, a legendary car now. And Rufus and myself, we drove Superboss cadets. You know, so we were opposing. We were the opposing poles. And Toby, who had the means at that point in time. I mean, Toby was then the champion in the Porsche Turbo Cup years. So by that point in time, he's already made his name in Porsche life. So it started with me at age, 8, and it then repeated itself on a few occasions. Meeting Andrew Gunn, getting involved in the Porsche club, and then I had my first experience in motorsport law. If you would you like to hear that story?
Which is the most interesting combination, and actually the most ideal combination for you at that point. But yes, please continue.
So, you know, young advocates always ask, how do we get it right? And we get asked. It's not unique. I presume every doctor gets asked by young doctors, how do you make it? How do you find your clients? Accountants, exactly the same. Where do you find clients? And my answer is a simple one. If you're in a field, if you're a professional, if you're interested in bonsai trees, using an absurd example, and you're a professional and you're in that field, and you mix yourself in that field, and you've got a passion for it, you will attract attention in that field. And I was a young advocate. I was very keen to succeed. And I got a phone call one day to say, will I please act in a motorsport matter? And I was briefed by an attorney to represent a legendary individual, Mr. Piazza Musso. Piazza Musso was, he's now deep into his 80s. He's still alive, very ill. But his children, Claudio Piazza Musso, became world champion in karting. Legendary karting people. Cut a long story short, I got briefed in a matter where Piazza Musso, who's from Italian descent, appeared before Motorsport South Africa. And they needed a lawyer. He needed a lawyer. So the problem was, when I researched the law, I couldn't appear there because you're not allowed at the first level of motorsport to be represented by counsel. You know, so you can only get involved at the National Court of Appeal.
Interesting.
So I consulted with Piazza Musso, and we put a statement together for him. And then it dawned on me that he was not so fluent in English. And he said, no, you know, he doesn't speak English well. So what we did is, it was a little bit naughty, may I say, but we prepared a beautiful statement for him. And we then went to the court. And Villa Verolini, and I can't remember who was the presiding person at the time. So they immediately asked me, am I an advocate? And I admitted, yes, I'm an advocate. And they said, well, you can't appear for Mr. Piazza Musso. And I then reasoned with them. I asked whether I would be allowed an opportunity. And I said, I'm only there to read a statement because my client does not speak English fluently. He's of Italian descent.
Yes.
So the one court member said, absolute rubbish. I've known Piazza Musso. Yes, he's got a very heavy accent, but, he's totally fluent in English. And Piazza Musso answered back in Italian, and he heavily denied it. And then in broken English said, but he feels uncomfortable reading the statement. Cut a long story short. The chairperson gave me the opportunity to read the statement. And I read it very passionately. And the matter finished. I didn't argue a word. I only read the statement. And a week or two later, the judgment was announced, and Piazza Musso won. And about 2 months later, I got a phone call from Motorsport South Africa. And they asked me whether I would consider to represent them in court cases. And, I was delighted to get that invitation. Yeah. So, whilst I didn't get involved in motorsport right from the beginning, and I didn't have the wherewithal and the money at all to do it, I was building a career. I got involved in the administration of motorsport, and that in itself had a wonderful opportunity in it. It's taken me, I've been involved at that level for 30 years. I am still deeply involved in the FIA, the International
at the highest level
Federation, and it ultimately professionally took me being a judge for a session of the FIA International Court of Appeal in Paris, and it was an unbelievable privilege, to sit in those matters, the highest litigation in motorsport of the world. When you walk down that corridors and you see an Ayrton Senna's helmet, Schumacher, Nigel Mansell, Fangio, you actually understand how privileged we were in South Africa being part of, we've got a wonderful ASN, Motorsport South Africa, even today, after COVID, has got, I think, 6,000 or 7,000 license holders. I think they still run 500 or 600 events per year. So they are one of the key members of the FIA, one of the 100, I think there's about 140 countries that is a member of the FIA, and they do magnificent work. And I'm coming back to my story about young advocates, or when you speak to young professionals. It's very seldom that you get involved exactly where you wanted to be. I wanted to be a racing driver. But how did I get involved in the sport? I actually got involved in the sport and the administration of it, and I was deeply involved in it, and I still am involved in it 30 years later. And that has taken me, on competency as a racing driver, I've had modest success, but there's no chance that I could be an international racing driver. I don't have the ability, I believe myself. But what I could do is I could professionally be involved in the most complicated matters and sit around the table with the players of the world. And what bigger opportunity is there, to do that? So motorsport is large, and it's got so many nooks and crannies. You don't have to be involved in circuit racing. Whether you're in the off-road stuff and the Dakar, management, marshalling, there's a place for everybody in motorsport because it is wide, it offers so much to people. And to me, I was installed by a hero that I saw, a David Piper, a 917. And in a weird way, the line of motor cars, I was never interested in, the fancy things driving. To me, a fast racing car was more important than a smart road car. I still drive my Jeep that is 15 years old, and I love driving alternative cars. So to me, it's the love of mobility, and it's the ability to go as fast as possible, as safe as possible, in a controlled environment, and at the end of the day, just forget about all the other things that we're busy doing.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear how involved you got in motorsport, which was your ultimate passion at that point. And I was thinking to ask the question, but did it fuel the fire or quench the fire to be a part of it to that extent? Sort of along the lines of too much of a good thing is a bad thing. But it sounds like it was actually something that fueled the fire even more and led you to actually go into motorsport, the sport itself. So if you'd like to share along those lines and talk about your motorsport experience over the years.
Yeah. Look, I think, there's a beautiful song that says, where you invest your love, you invest your life. I think that's true. Life will hardly give you returns if you don't invest in it. Or with me, I've not had the success of just touching something and then it suddenly, turns into this very satisfying, gratifying thing. I think everybody in life, when I look back at my life now, I'm at the age where I can start looking back and I can, philosophize a little bit. I think if one has got one passion in life, it's good. If you've got three, you probably are doing very well. And, a guy like Elon Musk, which everybody talk about now, the complexity of a mind like that is one thing, but what I get inspired with somebody like him is how diverse the man is. When you look at diverse personalities, and there's been diverse personalities in motorsport. Take Steve McQueen. He was a racing driver, but he was also an actor. He was an unbelievable actor. At some point in time, he said he's not sure whether he's a racing driver masquerading as an actor or an actor masquerading as a racing driver. So you can get a little bit confused in this process. But if you have two or three passions in life, and I had the ability and the opportunity to firstly be a lawyer, that was my passion, and it remains my passion. It gave me the opportunity again of sitting at the table where I never thought I would get to, which was your first question. Did you foresee that you could get there? The answer is no. You could never do it because, you just don't know. But that was my passion. Out of that passion, I identified something else, which was let me call it my enthusiasm. The passion was law. And the law was, it's my career, it's working. It didn't feel to me like working. And people permanently complain that they don't enjoy their jobs. I find it one of the most offensive things that people do. If you invest it in something and you do it, love it. And if you're good at it, you're going to love it. That's human. And if you can then find something that it instills your passion, something that wakes you at night, that you can look forward to. And with me, it was motorsport. And the law and the sport itself then crossed each other in, the administration of motorsport. So for years, I harbored that little part of it to say, I must go racing, because from the early 1990s, once I then got involved in this field of motorsport and engaging with people, what I then did is I met a very good friend with the name of Theo de Tooy. Theo opened up life to me. Theo's a gentleman driver. He can be a wonderful candidate for one of your podcasts if he agrees to it. He's a legendary guy. Theo went with me in the early 1990s, and we started participating in events abroad. We did the so-called classic tour rallies. So I think I've done 6 or 7 or 8 tour autos, which was then known as the Tour de France. They picked up a naming issue with the cycle race. It's now called Tour Auto or Le Tour. So from Paris to Biarritz, Paris to Nice. And for years, Theo and myself, he exposed me to the world, and it's one of your questions that you and I have discussed before. What is the most passionate country in the world about cars? Which one is the one that I identify with? Mine is France, and I'll identify it for you. And we can just discuss that later. So getting involved in these overseas events, which was a week at the time, it was fun events. It was, today they call them track days. At that point in time, there wasn't a name for them. People just got in their cars, 100 or 200 people, and they went on a 5 or 6 day tour, and they would go from town to town and then find a little hill climb and find a race circuit and then do 10 laps, do a hill climb, 2 people in a car. And I mean, I've had the most crazy experiences. My co-driver crashed. My co-driver, Dominique Moerkens, who was in Belgium, once crashed our rental car because he did a reconnaissance on a hill climb, which is a story for itself. I mean, we can be busy for hours.
Yes.
But Theo and myself started doing these events, and in the 1990s, to me it was about going to the famous racetracks, going to the Nürburgring, going to Spa, having the ability with, and at that point in time, people was not interested in old classic racing cars. You could buy these things for nothing. People have asked me how many times, how did I foresee, I've owned a few important classic racing cars, how did I have the foresight of buying those cars? I must tell you, it was absolute luck. Nobody wanted those things. Sometimes the shipping cost was too much to bring it back from Kayalami, so they would stay in South Africa, and people would buy them up. So in the 1990s, I got exposed to going to Europe and getting to these racetracks and actually having fun and driving these tracks. Not in racing events, but in fun events. But I started building up experience more and more. And in those early years with the Porsche Club, we were very competitive. I mean, the late Brian White, he was a legend. Between him, Toby, myself, Willie de Beer, and a few others, I mean, we went hammers and tongs. Frisco, as you may know, was a racing car. I mean, I crashed Frisco to pieces at Kayalami against Toby Venter, leading him in the first lap, and then making a massive mistake and almost killing myself. So the car was half destroyed. It disappeared out of my life. But Frisco will come back later to how it came back to me, and how that became a narrative of my life. But the 1990s were touring events in Europe, experiencing the tracks, very little racing. The 2000s was motorsport law and keeping the passion going and, building my career, really being involved in law, and there was very little time for fun. And I was involved in the Porsche Club, and I did, the things that we had to do. And I had moderate success there. And then in I would say the 2010s, there was a day that, as I was growing older, my PA Sunette one day said to me, "Look, you always wanted to be a racing driver. You absolutely, if you're going to do it, you must do it now." So I think in 2018, there was a sudden announcement that the 9 hours of Kayalami is being resuscitated, and it's coming back under the SRO, which at that point in time was music to my ears, because Kayalami was upgraded by Toby. It's a world facility. But notwithstanding his vision, the reality was that the track is not being used in motorsport, and it's still today so. It's really an issue that is of concern to motorsport people in South Africa. It's a fantastic facility, but it's not being used. And there's huge pressure on that. I think there's pressure on Toby, there's pressure on everybody to make it work, because you can't have a white elephant standing there without it being used. That's worse. So there's been attempts before to resuscitate the 9 hour, but it was local individuals that had a rerun of it, not for 9 hours. It was an hour or a 2 or a 3 hour event. And I think I won it 1 year as well, but it was not a 9 hour in proper GT3 cars. So what happened in 2019 is Suddenly there was an announcement, probably in 2018. There was an announcement that Kayalami is going to have the next 9 hour. And, that 50-year thing for me, remember 1969 to 2019, this is 50 years. That dream was alive in my mind for 50 years. And I was 58 years old, and I remember it so vividly. I picked up the phone and I phoned my mate, Franco Scribante. Franco and myself are competitors. We've competed against each other at the Simola Hillclimb on so many occasions. And I said, Frankie, the 9 hours on, do you want to go racing with me? And he immediately said yes. And I said, who's going to be our third driver? And he said, what about Dino? He's faster than both of us. Dino was a multiple national champion, Dino Scribante. So, again, Franco is a guy for you to talk to. So, the three of us embarked on a journey, and we went racing in the 2019 9 hours of Kayalami with an outdated 997R. I mean, there's the most amazing stories about that as well. So literally what happened is I leaned on everybody in my life. The first one that I leaned on was David Piper, because we needed a name for the team. It could not be Bezuidenhout and Scribante. That sounds like a legal firm or like a bunch of cement traders, So I said we need a team name. And I remembered Team Perfect Circle. Picked up the phone, I phoned David Piper. I think David was 87 years old. I said, David, can I please use the name David Piper? He said, how do you want to do that? I said, I want to use Team Perfect Circle. And I explained to him, and after I explained to him, he said, absolutely, it will be my pleasure. You can have the name. Yeah. We've not used it. I said, what was Team Perfect Circle? Well, it turned out that Team Perfect Circle was a name of a piston ring made in Brazil, a company that was taken over by Marley. Marley is now continues to be one of the manufacturers of the world in piston rings. So I made contact with Marley, told them the story. I said, can I please use the name Team Perfect Circle? They gave me consent. So now I had a name, Team Perfect Circle. We didn't have a livery, and we needed a car. We didn't have enough money to go and find a new Porsche 911R. So we found a 997R, which was completely outdated. I mean, our car came from 2010. Now, we were going to go into 2019 racing a car that's 9 years old. Now, anybody in motorsport will tell you at the highest level, if you can think Lewis Hamilton pitching up next year in a 2017 car or 2016 car, I mean, he won't make it onto the grid. But we did it. So Franco, myself, and Dino, we created the story around Team Perfect Circle. And I made contact with Jean Todt. I said, Jean, if we write a book about whatever is going to happen, would you please do the foreword? And he said, it will be my pleasure to do it. So Jean Todt did the front word in the book about Team Perfect Circle, which we published in, I think, 2021. I'll come back to that. So my mate Paul Giddon is a fantastic marketer of the world. He lives in the UK. He's done work for Mercedes-Benz, for Porsche, for Audi, for Rolls-Royce. So we got him involved to do a livery for us. We got Coca-Cola involved. They were the original sponsor of the Team Perfect Circle. We got Motul involved. Motul got involved. So we took the car, the 997, put it in this modern livery, and then we found a magnificent artist in Europe that took the old 917 and took the new 997, put next to each other, and it looked as if they were racing next to each other. So the livery was just amazing. So Paul Giddon flies to South Africa. He lands at the airport, and there's a Boeing of some sort with a clear tail. What does Paul Giddon does? He takes the Team Perfect Circle logo, He puts it on the back of the aircraft on a photograph, superimpose it,
Yes.
and puts a post up. Team Perfect Circle is on his way to South Africa.
Impressive.
Let me just take a sip
No,
of my
sure.
beautiful Bertha
Please.
for a moment.
Enjoy your wine. You've been speaking for a bit. But that is a very clever idea. That is
So-
some marketing stunt.
So it's in the book. I'll show you a photograph later. So everybody, Franco phones me up. He says, "What? My God!" He said, "What? Did we charter an aircraft?" I said, "No, we own the aircraft." What? I mean, he was so disturbed, and then I told him, "No, it's just Paul Giddon, who's taking the mickey out of everybody." But coming back to the event, we had the car there, the Porsche mechanics, and if I say the Porsche mechanics, I mean the top guys of the world looking after, Dennis Olsen, all the top racers at the time that competed with us. I mean, they came over to the 997 pits because we couldn't get this car to go properly. There was a problem with the brake system from the beginning, and they were working into the evening with us. I mean, they got software from Porsche. Porsche supported our effort. Everybody was trying to get this car to go as quickly as possible. So, bottom line of it is, Franco started off. He ran an hour. He stumbled out of the car after an hour in the car. He actually passed a few cars, did very well. Dino did the second hour. And I think we made up 4 or 5 places. So we were running, can't remember how many cars entered, but we were running 5 or 6 places better than where we qualified. And then I got in the car, and there was a yellow flag, and immediately after the yellow flag, which was into the third hour, I just suddenly felt this, ominous feeling in the gearbox. There's something wrong. So ultimately we broke a gearbox, and we had to retire the car. And, I had to decide, what am I doing with this bloody book that we asked Jean? And we decided to postpone the book for a year. And ultimately, when the book was written, and we sent it to Franco, we asked everybody for comments. Franco's comment, he's such a lovely guy, Franco, but he say it the way it is. He says, "I can't believe that we are publishing a book in which we didn't even make it to the end." That was his comment. But our effort was, 2019 was COVID. It was the pre-COVID period. And whilst we failed in 2019, in 2020, COVID hit us. So I decided to press on with Team Perfect Circle because I wanted to show what can one do if you put an effort into something, and particularly in what I love, which is motorsport. Dust off a brand that has not been used for so many years, put a lot of effort into it, ask your mates to support it, get a Jean Todt of the world to write the foreword, and get Paul Giddon to put this magnificent book together. So all of that worked out, but then we needed somebody to tell the narrative. And one of the best journalists that I've come across is a guy called Wilhelm Leutermans. So we asked Wilhelm, would he be interested to write the story of Team Perfect Circle? In other words, from 1969, this little journey that I saw the cars, the 917, 2019, total failure. 2020 we went back, and I mean, Martin, it was one of the most unbelievable days of my life. I mean, there's days that one can remember vividly, when my children was born. But that whole weekend, Dylan Pereira is a top racer of the world. Dylan Pereira was the fastest on the Thursday. He was the fastest out of everybody. I mean, he was beating the factory workers, factory drivers.
Yes.
On the Friday, I think we were still within the first 3. In qualifying, because you then take the average, he's a professional driver. Saul Hack is a very able, he was a silver driver. So Saul Hack I've raced with in Dubai. Saul did very well, and then I held my own. I was comfortably running with the other Pro-Am drivers.
Yes.
And when the Saturday came and we ran the 9 hours, I mean, we won we won the 9 hours of Kayalami in Pro-Am. And to me, that was a 51-year victory, because I thought about it, it's the Kayalami 9-hour,
Yes.
the memorabilia is here behind me and the trophy that we received. But my family was there, Paul Guidon was there. It was just an unbelievable experience, to, after so many years, don't give up. That's the bottom line of it. Just don't give up. People give up and say, how many times have you tried? No, I've tried for 2 years, 3 years. I was dreaming about it 51 years, and I was making an effort to train myself to become better and better and better, and I achieved it in the 51st year.
Yes.
And I probably will never achieve, a result like that again in proper Pro-Am, because we raced against the top guys of the world. When you're on the track with them, they know that you're a gentleman driver, and they will brush with you. But that's the beauty of motorsport. You and I can't. I mean, you're a young man now, but you can't pitch up at Loftus Versfeld or at Newlands and just say to them, my name is Andre, I would like to jump on the pitch with you on Saturday and have a little bit of fun. They'll kill you.
Yes.
Where in motorsport, there's this amazing thing between competitors. Look at Carlos Sainz, 61 years old, and he's just won the Dakar. I mean, it shows you how long you can do the sport. The eyesight sometimes go, the coordination go, and it arrives with different people at different times. But 61 years old, and he's won the toughest race in the world, the Dakar. So I'm very, very glad that I got involved in motorsport and not something like wrestling or boxing, because I would have achieved absolutely nothing. So I think your point was, how did it develop? How did the passion develop? How did it involve itself? It's been an ongoing thing over the last 3.5 decades for me. And I see it going into the future. I certainly hope it doesn't stop soon.
It doesn't seem like it will be peaking anytime soon, but it did seem like it went on for quite a while, not seeing much results or fruit of the efforts. And then almost suddenly...
How's your wine? Can I top up?
You may top up a bit, thank you very much. And then almost suddenly, within the stretch of 3-4 years, it became a reality. But like you said, 51 years down the line, instead of 2-3 years down the line, which I think makes it even sweeter when it actually came to pass.
And remember, my dream was to run Kayalami and to win a long distance race. But in the meantime, many other opportunities arrived. Things like the Simola Hillclimb. I mean, just look at Simola. This small little country of ours, South Africa, we are insignificant in the bigger scheme of things. But when we raise our voices, as we've heard a week ago in the International Court of Justice, when South Africa speaks, people actually listen. Irrelevant as to what side you sit on. We've had this something in the fibre of South Africa that we've always played a role for whatever reason is. People don't ignore us. They don't have to agree with us, but they cannot ignore us. And in motorsport, people could not ignore us. A Gordon Murray came from South Africa. Jody Scheckter came from South Africa. The Van der Lindes, look what they do now. They're South African. There's something about our nation. They are tenacious. When we get into it, we don't leave it. So the opportunities, it's not only dreaming about these big things. I've always been mad about hill climbs because we're talking about cars. So I remember, probably 30 years ago, there was a Krugersdorp hill climb where with Frisco, against far superior machinery, I always had the ability of seeing a track very quickly and driving it on sight for the first time quite fast.
Wow.
So I always used to come out with a very good result there if I didn't win it. So when Simola started, I didn't go to the Simola Hillclimb in the beginning. But the Simola Hillclimb started growing, and Franco was winning this, year on year, and I saw this happening. And by that point in time, I had the Dallara Formula One car in South Africa, which you remember I don't know whether you know the thing about Swartkops. So Swartkops, Peter de Tooy, when he designed the track, he said probably a car can't go faster than 60 seconds there. And it's always been who will go through 60 seconds first. And I went through the 60 seconds first, and I set a lap record of 58.8 in a proper race with a Formula One car. And that Dallara, actually, I took it to the Simola Hillclimb. Now, if you say a Formula One car at the Hillclimb, it's actually madness to take a Formula One car there, because it's 1.9 kilometers. A Formula One car is not made for a hill climb. It's made for beautiful, open, flat surfaces.
Yes.
So we had a stick shift, so the first gear was a dog leg, and I had to go first, second, third, fourth, fifth. So the cockpit is so small. I mean, Andrea de Cesaris, that drove the car, he was probably my size, but he was probably weighing 65 kilograms. Now, I was 85. So I could just fit into this car. And I went the first year with Greg Canny, and the car broke down. Franco beat me. And I decided I'm going back the second year. And the second year, I beat Franco and set a record. At that point in time, the records were 40. Franco with the Chevron, he was doing 40s and 39s just below that. And I set the first record that went at 38 seconds, which was substantially below. Now, as the years went on, I upgraded to the Dallara, to the Gould. Now, the Gould is also a Formula One car, stripped out to 70 kilograms. We're now at a 34 seconds. So, in a space of 6-7 years, I've won it 6 years. I went from a 38 to a 34. Now that's more than 10%.
Yes, that's considerable.
So it's an unbelievable amount. So Simola gave a wonderful opportunity for me to continue with my personal inclination. I would practice hard for it, go to Kayalami, and then pitch up every year and go and run at Simola. And last year was particularly great because all the kids were there. And I ran it in Classic as well, and I won the Classic one for the first time with a Lola. So I had a double victory. So it was a particularly great experience for me at Simola last year.
I think meandering from racing into a certain car that started out as a race car, we have to touch on Frisco and all that is Frisco and the experiences of Frisco. Unfortunately, we don't have another 4 hours to talk about this, but I'd still love to delve a bit into the conversation. So almost wanted to ask, who's Frisco? Because it feels like it has a personality of its own.
It does. It's actually quite a beautiful story that Roger McCleary reminded me of, that I should tell it more than once. So my late mother lived with me for the last year of her life in 2010. I arrived at home one day. She was very grumpy. I looked at her, I said, "What's wrong, Ma?" She said, "Nothing." I said, "Come on, something is wrong." "Nothing." So I asked for the third time. She looked at me, she said, "You're so grand for yourself." She says, "And everything in this house is the best." She says, "But your coffee is rubbish."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Ma, what's wrong?" She said, "Just buy me a tin of Frisco." So I called Nicholas, my right-hand man. I said, "Nicholas, please come here." So I said, "Won't you please go and get us a tin of Frisco?" And as Nicholas walked out, my mother said, "Well, if you can't find Frisco, get us a tin of Ricoffee." What's the bottom line of this? The bottom line of it is never forget where you come from. So I decided to adopt this little nickname, Frisco. And when the 911 came back to me, so in 1994, I crashed the car, which was highly modified, against Toby at Kayalami. I almost killed myself, landed up in hospital. The car was destroyed. I rebuilt it as a road car, and it was sold. And it went into normal life. I recovered, and That's part of racing. I think in 2015, suddenly I realized that there was a car in somebody's collection which resembled Frisco. So I was invited to go and look at the car, and I looked at the car and I took the door and opened the door. Now, after the car was crashed, we fixed it up, but the one thing we couldn't fix up was the door mechanism. If you pulled the door halfway, it hooked and then it went clack. So I took this car, it had green rims, pulled it was an RS replica, pulled it and clack. I closed it, clack. I spoke to the gentleman, I told him it was my car, almost killed myself in it, and he graciously agreed to sell the car to me.
Yeah.
So I bought the car back, and over a period of 2 years, we rebuilt Frisco. We brought it back to a 911T standard. It was a 69, funny enough, 69T.
Yes.
And I just called it the TR for rallying. So you remember the 911 TR,
Yes.
very limited number, I think 26 or 28 made by Porsche. And when I got married to Kayalami, we decided to take a year sabbatical, and I decided to go and look at racetracks of the world. So I registered a little project, and we went to Australia, New Zealand, and we left the car there for a year at a time. The first year was us alone. Did a magnificent tour of Australia. Went from Sydney to Melbourne. We drove it to Ayers Rock, which was, an experience in itself in the outback. People thought we mad. Then took it to New Zealand in the most unbelievable roads. To drive Frisco onto the South Island to Milford Sound was just unbelievable. And I then sent the car to Japan. So by that point in time, Marnella was born. And Marnella's happy place was in this Porsche, sitting on the back seat where the oil pipes on the outside runs. It's warm. And still today, if you take Marnella, 5 years old, you put her in the car in Frisco, it's now in South Africa, and we go for a drive for 10 minutes, 5 minutes and she's asleep.
Oh my
because it's a happy place.
Yes.
She grew up in it. So we took the car, we traveled with it when Siya Kolisi and company won the World Cup in Japan. I was there. I bought the tickets up front, and Frisco was there. We branded it with, Go Boca Go.
Yes.
And there's amazing stories about that. I mean, I'll keep you busy for hours, but the evening that we won the World Cup, Frisco was arrested. So what happened is we came back from the stadium, from Yokohama, in Tokyo, and as we were stationary, a taxi came, and my daughter opened the door, and the taxi brushed the door. The police came. It wasn't our fault. But then they realized that our insurance on the car expired 2 days earlier.
Oof.
And in Japan, you have to comply to the law. So Frisco was impounded. And these videos, I don't know whether you've seen them, there's actually a bunch of Englishmen pushing Frisco with me. Eventually, after 5 hours, I convinced them not to put it in the pound, but to push it to an undercover roofing place, and Frisco was going to leave in any event in 2 days thereafter. So at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning, you see that Frisco is surrounded by 6 policemen, and I'm pushing the car, and there's other people pushing Frisco. Why? Because they said Frisco can't go under its own power.
Sure.
But it can be pushed.
Yes.
So Frisco has had many, many stories. It's now back in South Africa. Because of COVID, it was destined to go from Japan to Russia, and then it was intended that we do a trip there. But unfortunately, when you send it with a FIA car now, you need to go and pick the car up. So nobody wanted the car in COVID, came back to South Africa, and it's now being repaired and looked after. I've done a few trips with it. It's gone to Madikwe. It's gone to the game parks. It's done a lot of stuff in South Africa. It's gone to Africa Burn, I must tell you.
Which is such an interesting
It was completely crazy because a 911 on a gravel road is actually better than a 4x4. So without being reckless, whenever there was an opportunity, you'll see these beautiful GLs and whatever going at whatever speed. and they couldn't believe it. We were passing them,
Yeah.
and the car was totally safe. So there's a future for Frisco.
Yes.
Maybe it's going to go to Morocco at the end of the year. And,
That's exciting.
you know, it's part of the family silver, and I hope that the kids will continue using it, you know, as long as what cars, if they maintain, they go on forever, and Porsches go on forever.
Is this the type of car that is sort of a forever car? Not really going to get sold out of the
Look,
family.
Yeah, look, I think Frisco is the first 911 which I had. It is the 911 that almost killed me. It then left and came back. We've traveled the world with it. I've had a second leash of life with Marnella and Corlandi in it. You know, it is as dear as what you can. I mean, what can you get that's more dear than that? I think
Yes.
it's family silver, and I think the kids and everybody understands how close Frisco is to my heart. So it's I've had many offers to sell the car at crazy prices. And, you know, it started a bit of a cult thing. I mean,
Yes.
Porsche's now manufacturing that green color. It's a Porsche color, which, you know, it's an olive color. I got it from a Jeep Wrangler with a little bit of silver in.
Who would have known?
Joe, nobody knew it. So Joe Staudinger, my mate in Johannesburg, I was looking for a color maroon or something unique, and we found this green, and we then put a little bit of silver in it. You know, so it's a very unique color. But Sam, you know, seen through glass. Sam copied it first. He was happy to acknowledge it. And from there on, I mean, there's now new 992s, 993. Whatever the cars are, 991s, everybody's building. It's a Porsche color now. People love
Completely.
green, and they love the olive green. So Frisco has been very, very good to me, and it's a special car in my life.
Just touching on copies of Frisco, I mentioned earlier before the podcast that where I first learned of you in Frisco was when Seen Through Glass met with you here when he was in South Africa.
Yes.
And his whole idea of this drive the world trip and the
Yes.
car that he wanted was this 911T.
Yes.
Sort of copying what Frisco
Yes.
is and how it looks like and what Frisco did. But then also recently when I was in the Kruger, I saw a 911 Dakar almost in a very similar livery to Frisco 911, also
Yes.
with the roof rack,
Yes.
also with spots at the front.
Yes.
And I think for many, it's just, for me, and I've shared this before the podcast as well, but it resembles much more than just a cool looking car. But this idea of a sort of a sporty car that you can actually drive anywhere and everywhere, that you can go camp with, go to Africa Burn. That picture, you have a picture on Instagram of the car being super dirty with a solar panel
Yes.
on the roof charging a battery.
Very true.
And a few pictures later, it's your daughter sleeping in the
Yes.
back and
Yes.
traveling. Like, just the idea, the resemblance, I guess what it signifies is it's truly special.
Yeah, it's part of our lives. You know, the bottom line of an item like that is, what's the real purpose of it? It's the gel. It becomes a storyline in our lives. So that 911, my son Yandre, the day that the car was crashed, a week later when I was discharged from hospital, there's photographs with Yandre and Imke and Berdien and myself with that car. So my first family was deeply entrenched in the hurt and the opportunities which that car gave me. And when it came back again, you know, now it's a road car. And it's part of the gel that keeps us together. And I think if one can find something like that in one's life, whatever that is, whether it's bonsai trees, and
Whatever.
I always use this example because I look at people who are excited about bonsai trees and they predict how these things are going to turn in a few months, etc., etc. The commitment that they have, to me, is inspiring. So if one can get something that excites you in life, it doesn't have to be a Porsche. You know, there are people that are as passionate about Alphas, you know, Renaults, small little cars. It doesn't have to be one of the major brands, but just be excited about it. I mean, we did a bit of skiing now, and the guy that took us to the airport, I asked him about his car because we were driving in the snow, and he couldn't answer one question. He didn't know. He knew that it was diesel.
Yes.
He couldn't tell me how strong is it. Nothing. He says no, he's not interested in cars. He just buys them and he drives them. Could say nothing about them, which I just find odd.
Yes. It's not everyone's story necessarily.
It's not everybody's story, but if you're excited about cars, just put a bit of effort in and understand them.
Since
They give you back so much.
Yes, no, they do. I guess the idea of mobility to get places is already intriguing enough. But since you are, just to end off, and since you are a dreamer and a visionary, and for much of your life you've pursued a dream and a vision, and it's for many times become true, which is such an awesome story to be able to tell. Is there a bucket list experience? Is there some automotive motoring journey you'd still like to embark on? Is there an experience, a vision like that you'd still like to achieve?
I've always had a dream to race at Le Mans. I'm not sure that it's still possible for me at my age. The budget that people need to go and do that event is huge.
It must be unbelievable.
So I've been to Le Mans a few times. That would have been an amazing experience, but I think that journey for me is over, because you must either be in a GT3 car or an LMP car, which I don't think there's an opportunity now. I'm not sure that I'll fit in it. So that's the one thing. I must tell you that I've been toying with this Dakar thing for a long, long time, and Glenn Hall, is the doyen of the South African Toyota team. So I'm not sure, maybe there's going to be a call to Glenn soon to say, Glenn, how do I find my way into, whether it's driving a sport vehicle or driving in the classic, because they've got a classic division now. But I think something like that, I like tough things. Those to me has given me the best experiences in life. Quick, nice things are quick and they go away. But it's those ones that you work very hard for and when they happen. So maybe that's a dream that I should still look at.
I think it might not be too far away if it just going off of our conversation as was.
Yes.
But Andre, I just want to thank you for your time and your stories and your experience. I really enjoyed it. And I think for so many listening and watching, it just sparks the fire again. Maybe some people have had visions and dreams of things they really wanted to experience, but maybe they've been pursuing it for a while and it just hasn't turned out that way. But I think your story really helps people maybe find that passion a bit again. So thanks for sharing it also, whether it be on Instagram or through other people and conversations. But thank you for your time. I've really enjoyed it. And usually at the end of the podcast, I say, rather love cars because it's better than drugs.
Oh, absolutely. It doesn't take that much out of you. It doesn't destroy your life.
No.
And in a weird way, the connectivity brings you to the most amazing people. And thank you for somebody like you. You in the beginning of your career, the passion that you've got, laying these things on and having podcasts, and thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
No, massive pleasure. Cheers, everyone.